This is the amount tied to the scandals surrounding Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, starting with a so-called lecture trip to Beijing in 2018. But we all know it wasn't just a lecture fee. It was a down payment. A down payment to open American policy doors for Chinese real estate and technology firms. Gasps, murmurs, reporters' pens scratched like frantic insects. The session had barely begun, and already the stage was on fire. The hearing was convened in Washington, D.C., broadcast live on every network. The title Oversight Committee on Energy Finance and Foreign Influence. But to the public, it was something else entirely. It was Judgment Day for Jasmine Crockett. John Kennedy, the sharp-witted senator from Louisiana, brought his full weight. He was unshaken, equipped with a folder stacked with exhibits, his reputation for cutting through nonsense with folksy wisdom and unyielding facts making him the perfect leader for this inquiry. Beside him sat committee members ready to support, but it was Kennedy whose questions had sparked this entire probe, his commitment to transparency driving the charge. Across from them, Crockett, flanked by aides, hiding behind polished smiles, her demeanor cracking under the scrutiny. Kennedy lifted a single document, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the room like a clear bell. Exhibit A Payment Slip, March 2018. Source: Dragon Bridge Holdings, Shanghai, $250,000 labeled as honorarium for lecture. The lecture lasted 90 minutes. You do the math. He slammed the paper down with deliberate force, the sound echoing off the chamber walls. That's over 2,700 per minute. That isn't a lecture. That's a bribe. Congresswoman, your Beijing trip was followed by your advocacy for loosening restrictions on Chinese tech investments. Coincidence, or did the money help guide your vote? Crockett sneered, her face tightening, trying to project confidence but betraying unease. Senator, I fight for progress. Renewable energy open trade, not xenophobia. Kennedy raised his eyebrows, his expression one of calm disbelief. His southern drawl adding a layer of folksy authority that made his words land even harder. Progress doesn't usually come with wire transfers. The crowd erupted again, murmurs turning to outright gasps, the air thick with tension as spectators leaned forward in their seats. Kennedy was merciless, his approach methodical, never raising his voice, but letting the facts speak volumes. Let's move forward. Exhibit B, Federal Election Commission filings from recent years. He flipped to a chart with precision, his fingers pointing out the damning details. Line 47. Travel expenditures, $40,000. On closer inspection, those funds covered luxury flights, Hermes handbags, and expenses tied to your private wedding event. A screen behind him flashed images, receipts, boarding passes, invoices, each one projected in high definition for all to see. This wasn't campaign business. This was personal indulgence, paid by donors who believed they were supporting democracy, not your closet. Crockett's face hardened, her eyes narrowing as she snapped back. You think you're clever. You think I'm afraid of a few receipts. Kennedy smiled faintly, a knowing grin that showed his unflappable nature, his dedication to the truth shining through. Not afraid. Exposed. He picked up the next thread seamlessly, his preparation evident in every move. And then there's the matter of your legal history. The State Bar of Texas back in the day. He held up a single sheet of paper, partially redacted, but revealing enough. This document shows you were disciplined for mishandling $75,000 of client funds. That sanction mysteriously disappeared from public records. Do you deny this? Crockett's jaw clenched, her composure slipping as she responded curtly. Those allegations were dismissed. Dismissed, Kennedy repeated with emphasis, or buried thanks to political allies. The silence that followed was louder than any applause, the room hanging on his every word, his integrity commanding respect. Kennedy leaned in, voice calm, but cutting his eyes locked on hers with the focus of a man who had spent years fighting for accountability. This isn't about one payment, or one baggage, or one buried file. This is about a pattern, a career built on cutting corners, cashing favors, and cloaking corruption behind slogans of progress. He turned to the cameras, his gaze steady, addressing the nation directly, underscoring his role as a guardian of public trust. And the American people deserve to know who is buying their representatives, because it isn't them. The gavel struck again. Order, order. But the room had already slipped into chaos, whispers spreading like wildfire. Finally, Crockett lashed out, her voice rising in frustration. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "John Kennedy is nothing but a mouthpiece dragged out here to smear with baseless conspiracies." Kennedy didn't blink, his poise unbreakable, his response measured and fact-based. Witch hunts don't come with receipts, with payment slips, with bar records. This isn't theater, Congresswoman, it's accountability. The audience erupted. Journalists fired off questions, cameras zoomed in on every twitch of Crockett's face, capturing the moment her facade began to crumble. Kennedy ended the first segment with one last dagger, his words delivered with the precision that had earned him admiration across the aisle. "Congresswoman Crockett, you can call this political. You can call it theater, but the numbers don't lie. 250,000 from Beijing. 40,000 misused from campaign coffers. 75,000 vanished from a client's trust. These aren't stories. They are facts." His voice dropped to a whisper that still carried across the hall, a testament to his commanding presence. "And the American people are watching." The screen froze on Crockett's face, sweat-glistening eyes, darting hands, gripping the table, like it might keep her from sinking. The hearing was only beginning, but the tide had already turned, thanks to Kennedy's relentless pursuit of the truth. The gavel struck again, signaling a brief recess, but the energy in the room lingered, charged with anticipation. As the hearing resumed, cameras zoomed in on John Kennedy, his eyes sharp, his folder thicker than before, ready to build on the foundation he had laid. He lifted a glossy photo, holding it up for all to see, a seaside villa, white stone walls gleaming under the California sun. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the property purchased jointly by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Governor Gavin Newsom. Value $3.7 million, location an exclusive island retreat. The funds traced directly to shell companies linked to Wind Coast 2030. Gasps filled the room, the revelation hitting like a thunderclap. Kennedy leaned forward, speaking with the precision of a surgeon, his logical mind dissecting the web of deceit. So while Wind Coast 2030 was reporting quarterly losses for years, its money somehow financed luxury real estate for elected officials. Convenient accounting, isn't it? Crockett shifted in her chair, discomfort evident as Newsom's name hung heavy in the air, whispered among the crowd, scrawled in reporters' notebooks. Kennedy placed a second folder onto the table with authority. Bank records. Cayman Islands wire transfers totaling $18.4 million. The sender subsidiaries of Wind Coast 2030. The recipients, 2 accounts connected to Crockett's PAC and Governor Newsom's trust. The projection screen lit up with spreadsheets, columns of numbers, transfer codes, offshore addresses. Undeniable. This is money meant for renewable energy infrastructure. Solar grids, wind farms, community power. Instead, it became the private piggy bank for Crockett and Newsom. The crowd hissed, reporters muttered, Even committee members shifted uncomfortably, the evidence no longer abstract but tangible, thanks to Kennedy's meticulous preparation. Kennedy stood tall, his voice commanding. The committee calls on Dr. Sandra Lopez, forensic accountant. Sandra adjusted her glasses, her voice steady as she testified. My team analyzed Wind Coast 2030 financial statements over several years. The company claimed operating losses of $312 million, yet hidden beneath write-offs and tax credits. We found offshore transfers matching the amounts in Exhibit E. This is deliberate fraud. No errors, not mismanagement. Fraud. The word echoed like a hammer blow reverberating through the chamber. Crockett's knuckles whitened as she gripped the table, her earlier defiance waning. Kennedy struck again, his timing impeccable. Leaked emails between Crockett's staff and Newsom's chief energy advisor. Subject line, delayed disclosure until after the election. These exchanges prove coordination, suppressing financial reports, hiding offshore dealings, and delaying the fallout, until voters could no longer respond. He paused, letting the words sink in, his strategic pause, amplifying the impact. This isn't just corruption. This is election fraud by concealment. Crockett slammed her palm on the table, her outburst revealing her desperation. I will not sit here and be slandered by partisan theatrics. Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his response unflinching. You're not sitting here by choice, Congresswoman. You're sitting here because the people demand answers. His words carried the weight of his long service, his dedication to the public good, evident in every syllable. Governor Newsom may not be in this room, but his fingerprints are everywhere. The memo trails the wire transfers, the property records. They tie you both together in a web of greed. The question is no longer whether corruption happened. It's whether you'll admit it. The crowd murmured, reporters tweeted furiously, hashtags beginning to trend like wildfire across social media. For the first time, Crockett's composure faltered visibly, her voice shaking as she retorted, You think you can break me with paperwork? With doctored files and partisan spin? You're destroying renewable energy just to score political points. Kennedy's voice was cold steel, his rebuttal rooted in unassailable logic. Renewable energy isn't destroyed by oversight. It's destroyed by those who steal from it. Every stolen dollar is a turbine unbuilt, a family still paying higher bills, a community left in the dark. Gasps turned to silence, then applause from the public seating, the room acknowledging Kennedy's clarity and commitment. He closed his folder with finality. We've shown personal corruption. Now we've shown institutional fraud. This is no longer about Jasmine Crockett alone. It is about a partnership, a deliberate, coordinated theft. And today, the American people see the faces behind it, Crockett and Newsom. The camera zoomed in on Crockett, sweat glistening on her brow, her lips trembling as she forced a smile. But her empire was cracking, and everyone knew it all because of John Kennedy's unwavering stand for justice. Kennedy raised a new folder, his movements deliberate. This testimony comes from Michael Tren, former Department of Energy contracts officer. He was embedded in Wind Coast 2030 oversight for years. Michael's video deposition filled the screen, his words measured but damning. I was pressured by senior officials to ignore inflated bids. A wind turbine listed at $6 million per unit was actually worth less than $2.5 million. Every objection I filed was deleted from the DOE record system. Eventually, I was pushed out. Kennedy turned to the audience, his explanation clear and compelling. That's not just negligence, that's collusion. Crockett's PAC received direct campaign donations within weeks of those inflated contracts being approved. The The crowd murmured, anger rising, the revelations piling up under Kennedy's guidance. Enter Sarah Kim, forensic analyst with the Congressional Budget Office. Sarah stepped up, her voice steady. Our audit tracked a $58 million discrepancy tied directly to California green energy grants. Invoices didn't match shipments. Some equipment never even arrived on U.S. soil, but subsidies were still claimed. Kennedy nodded, his question pointed. And who signed off? Sarah didn't blink. Jasmine Crockett and Gavin Newsom's Joint Committee on Renewable Growth. Gasps rippled across the room, the connections becoming crystal clear. Crockett shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening as Kennedy's hand hit the table and a new image appeared on screen. Crockett boarding a first-class Emirates flight to Dubai. Federal Election Commission filings show $40,000 categorized as constituent outreach travel. But look closer. Business-class hotels in the Maldives, designer Hermes purchases. These weren't outreach trips. They were luxury vacations funded by campaign dollars. That's not just sloppy accounting, Kennedy chimed in with authority. That's theft under election law. The gallery erupted, phones lit up, hashtags surging again. Jasmine luxury fraud. Crockett scandal. Kennedy's voice lowered, sharpened his narrative, building momentum. Before her political career, Crockett was a lawyer in Texas. What she doesn't want the public to know, her law license was suspended for misconduct. The records were buried, but today, they're here. He held up a stamped file from the Texas State Bar. The clerk read aloud, failure to disclose conflict of interest. Temporary suspension, 2012. Crockett slammed her fist on the desk. Objection! That's irrelevant. Kennedy cut her off smoothly. Character matters when public trust is at stake. If you hid misconduct, then why should the people believe you now? His point landed with the force of truth, his integrity shining. The revelations kept coming, relentless as a tide in the hallowed halls of Washington, D.C., where the Oversight Committee hearing had transformed into a courtroom of public reckoning. John Kennedy, the steadfast senator from Louisiana, commanded the room with his unshakable poise, his folksy charm masking a steel-trap mind honed by years of battling bureaucratic shadows. The first blows had landed hard, exposing Crockett's dubious Beijing payout and misused campaign funds. But now Kennedy dove deeper, peeling back the layers of financial deceit tied to Wind Coast 2030, the grand renewable energy initiative that had devolved into a multi-million-dollar grift. The atmosphere crackled, spectators leaning forward, reporters' devices glowing as live feeds captured every moment. Kennedy rose once more, his folder an arsenal of truth, slamming down a sheaf of bank statements with a thud that silenced the murmurs. Ladies and gentlemen, behold the core of this corruption. $312 million in offshore transfers snaked through shell entities in the Cayman Islands, Macau, and Singapore. These weren't savvy investments for a greener tomorrow. They were pilfered dollars yanked from taxpayer pockets, intended for wind turbines and solar arrays. And at the end of this money trail, Congresswoman Crockett and Governor Newsom, their signatures and proxies woven into every transaction, every concealed ledger. The oversized screen ignited with a labyrinth of flowcharts, arrows piercing from federal grants to opulent holdings, the visual aid driving the point home like a sledgehammer. Gasps cascaded through the audience, phones buzzing as #WindCoastFraud rocketed up trending lists, the public's fury igniting in real time. Kennedy's voice, infused with that down-home Louisiana cadence, pierced the din with surgical precision. Congresswoman, care to explain how a venture hemorrhaging cash on paper could underwrite a $3.7 million seaside villa in California deeded to you and Newsom? Mere luck or outright looting? Crockett fidgeted, her once confident posture wilting under the glare, but she rallied with a snarl. "Senator, these are fabrications. Renewable projects navigate tough waters. But I've championed advancement, not avarice." Kennedy's eyebrows arched his retort, landing like a well-aimed arrow, his dedication to fiscal honesty shining through. "Advancement doesn't vanish into tax havens, ma'am." He pivoted smoothly, unveiling another damning exhibit, intricate spreadsheets detailing the siphoned sums. "Right here, 18.4 million funneled to accounts linked to your PAC and Newsom's trust fund. Funds earmarked for powering communities rerouted to fuel private excesses, yacht charters, exotic getaways." The crowd seethed whispers, escalating to outright boos, everyday folks in the gallery clenching fists at the raw injustice. Kennedy summoned his key witness with the timing of a master conductor, fortifying his narrative brick by incriminating brick. "Take the stand. Angela Ruiz, the CPA, who once audited Seabright Holdings, the phantom firm, propping up this house of cards." Angela approached her composure, a quiet fortress amid the storm, swearing in with a steady hand. "I was brought on to scrutinize the finances, but when I spotlighted millions evaporating overseas, Crockett's operatives leaned hard back off, or kiss your credentials goodbye." I walked away, but not empty-handed. She brandished a USB stick, its innocuous form packed with dynamite, the chamber hushing to a pin-drop silence, broken only by shutter clicks. Every transaction, every time stamp, every fabrication documented right here. Cheers erupted from the back rows, but Kennedy quelled them with a raised palm, his leadership restoring order effortlessly. "Much obliged, Ms. Ruiz. This ain't mere tip-offs. It's dismantling a premeditated rip-off." He wheeled back to Crockett, his interrogation a velvet glove over an iron fist. "Congresswoman, while your crew muzzled watchdogs, you and Newsom lounged in a Caribbean paradise villa, snapped up with these pilfered proceeds titled to an underling but frequented by you both last summer. How do you square plundering public coffers for personal playgrounds?" Crockett's cheeks reddened, her comeback stumbling over itself. "This is mangled misinformation. Those assets are forward-thinking stakes, not sleight of hand." Kennedy pounced his logic, a bulwark against deflection. "Stakes don't demand dummy corporations and scrubbed reviews." The murmurs swelled, devices alight with viral clips, indignation cresting, as Kennedy flashed more visuals, itemized bills for Hermes purses, Emirates first-class jaunts to Dubai, all debited from election war chests masquerading as outreach ops. 40 grand chalked up as voter engagement, but drilled down Maldives, hideaways, couture splurges. This wasn't democracy in action. It was daylight robbery. Journalists hammered keys, the room pulsing with strobes and urgency. Kennedy forged ahead, his tenacity, a rallying cry, a lawmaker whose quest for clarity galvanized the masses. Now the bloated deals turbines priced at $6 million apiece, when fair market's half that. "Ms. Ruiz, lay it out for us." Angela affirmed without hesitation, her words a clarion call. "Absolutely, Senator. My flags got flushed down the drain, and Crockett's PAC pocketed donations mere weeks post-approval. Collusion cut and dried. The term boomed like thunder, ricocheting through the space. Crockett pounded the desk, her tone veering into hysteria. "You're torpedoing crucial green endeavors with this farce." Kennedy's stare hardened his riposte, forged in fact. "Nope, Congresswoman. You torpedoed 'em by raiding the till like it was your piggy bank. Each swiped buck robs a turbine from rising burdens, families with steeper tabs, leaves towns groping in the gloom." Ovations thundered anew, amplified, as Kennedy wrapped this salvo with eloquence. "We've flayed Wind Coast 2030, bare unmasking, Not mere swindles, but a stab in the back to public faith. Yet the tangle thickens, and Americans merit the full, unvarnished truth. Cameras zeroed on Crockett perspiration, tracing her temple knuckles white on the wood as her realm teetered. Kennedy reclined dossier at the ready, his mission ongoing, but his imprint indelible, the surge of righteousness mounting beneath his vigilant watch. The gavel cracked, yet the echoes persisted. The country riveted as a single senator's crusade shredded corruption's shroud. The scrutiny intensified, Kennedy unveiling leaked memos between Crockett's aides and Newsom's energy czars, subject lines screaming cover-up, delay reports till post-vote. These missives screamed orchestration, stifling disclosures, camouflaging offshore hauls, postponing blowback till ballots were cast. He let the implication marinate his pause, a masterstroke. This transcends graft. It's ballot box bamboozlement via omission. Crockett erupted, palm-smacking oak. "I won't endure this partisan puppetry." Kennedy's retort was ice. "You're here by public mandate, not whim." Newsom's marks are ubiquitous. The trails transfers deeds binding you in avarice's net. Admission time. The throng buzzed, scribes tweeted madly, tags trending wildly. Crockett's poise shattered her rebuttal, quaking. "Paperwork won't shatter me, faked docs and bias. You're gutting green tech for cheap wins." Kennedy countered like tempered blade oversight builds theft breaks. Each filched coin denies a blade's spin, hikes household dues, dims neighborhoods. Hushed awe yielded to claps. He sealed his binder, personal rot shown. Now systemic scam. Beyond Crockett, it's a duo's deliberate heist, faces exposed to the populace. Lenses honed on Crockett, gleam of sweat, quivering lips forcing a grin, her dominion fracturing visibly under Kennedy's unswerving justice. The chamber in Washington, D.C. thrummed with raw intensity, the Oversight Committee hearing reaching its boiling point as the nation held its collective breath. John Kennedy, the astute senator from Louisiana, orchestrated the climax with the finesse of a maestro, his strategic mind connecting dots that had long been obscured in shadows of power. The earlier revelations had cracked the foundation. Beijing bribes misused funds, offshore millions. But now, Kennedy escalated, exposing the deliberate cover-ups that shielded Crockett and Newsom's empire of deceit. The room pulsed with anticipation, cameras whirring spectators on edge. As Kennedy unveiled a trove of leaked emails, his voice steady, commanding respect earned through decades of principled service. Ladies and gentlemen, these internal communications between Crockett's staff and Newsom's energy advisors paint a picture of calculated concealment, subject lines like delay disclosure until post-election, directives to suppress financial reports, bury offshore dealings, and postpone any fallout until voters were locked in. He projected the messages onto the screen, redacted only where necessary, the words damning in black and white. "Hold the audits, can't risk exposure before the polls." Gasps echoed reporters' fingers, blurring over devices, hashtags like #Crockett. Cover up, surging like wildfire across the digital landscape. Kennedy's gaze pierced Crockett, his question a scalpel. "Congresswoman, how do you defend coordinating to hide these truths from the very people you swore to represent? Was this service to the public or self-preservation at any cost?" Crockett recoiled, her defiance fraying at the edges, but she lashed out. "Senator, these are cherry-picked snippets. Context matters, and I've always prioritized transparency in my fight for progress." Kennedy's response was a masterclass in restraint, his Southern wisdom underscoring the gravity. Transparency doesn't thrive in deleted files and delayed truths, ma'am. He pressed on, summoning a pivotal witness with impeccable timing, layering the evidence like an unbreakable chain. Take the stand, David Ramirez, once a trusted ally in Crockett's inner circle, now estranged and armed with insider knowledge that could topple giants. David approached his face etched with regret, swearing in with a voice that trembled at first, but grew firm. I was her colleague for years, but I became her unwilling accomplice, pressured to overlook inflated contracts, funnel donations through back channels, even shred documents tying us to those Beijing payouts. Crockett told me straight, don't rock the boat. The donors expect results. But when I pushed back, I was sidelined, threatened with ruin. He produced a folder of memos, the room falling into stunned silence as the clerk read excerpts aloud, coordinate with Newsom's team, keep the Wind Coast losses off the books till after midterms. Applause mingled with outrage from the gallery, but Kennedy maintained order, his leadership a steady anchor. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. This isn't betrayal of friendship. It's loyalty to the truth the American people deserve. He pivoted seamlessly, linking the testimony to broader patterns, his intellect weaving the narrative into an irrefutable tapestry. And let's not gloss over your legal past, Congresswoman, the Texas State Bar suspension in 2012 for misconduct, failure to disclose conflicts, mishandling client funds. Those records didn't vanish. They were sealed in 2019, courtesy of political favors and a public service exemption. And he held up the unsealed affidavit, the stamp gleaming under the lights, the clerk intoning the details. Temporary suspension approved, but petition for burial granted amid rising political profile. The audience inhaled sharply, the revelation striking like lightning, families whispering in disbelief at the depth of the duplicity. Kennedy leaned forward, his strategy flawless, connecting the dots from past indiscretions to present scandals. Congresswoman, you didn't learn from that sanction. You buried it, just like you buried audit trails and email chains. This isn't isolated. It's a lifelong pattern of evasion from Texas courtrooms to Capitol Hill corridors. Crockett's composure shattered, her voice cracking as she countered. That was a decade-old mistake irrelevant to my service now. Kennedy's rebuttal was swift, his words laced with unyielding principle. Mistakes teach, if acknowledged, not erased, and yours repeated on a grander scale, harming taxpayers, undermining elections. The crowd roared, phones alight with live streams, the chamber a cauldron of focused fury. Kennedy amplified the high stakes, projecting more evidence correspondence with the Bar Association, pleas for suppression, citing ongoing public duties. He questioned Ramirez further, drawing out vivid accounts. Tell us about the pressure on those turbine deals, $6 million per unit, when worth half. David nodded gravely. I raised red flags, but Crockett dismissed them. It's all part of the game. Newsom's got our back. Weeks later, subsidies flowed, bonuses cashed, while communities waited for power that never came. Kennedy nodded, his insight piercing. See the link, folks. From sealed records to silenced witnesses, it's all concealment to protect the plunder. Crockett slammed the table, her outburst raw. You're weaponizing history for political theater. Kennedy's eyes narrowed, his response a beacon of calm authority. History isn't weaponized, it's illuminated, and yours casts long shadows on public trust. The applause thundered, veterans in the audience nodding in solemn agreement, the weight of betrayal heavy. Kennedy tied it back to the Beijing thread, flashing the 2018 lecture photo. Anew, smiling under red banners, $250,000. For 90 minutes, policy shifts following like clockwork. Ramirez confirmed that trip It was the gateway eased Chinese investments greased by those honorariums. The room exploded, journalists shouting questions, cameras capturing Crockett's paling face, her hands trembling. Kennedy, ever the strategist, closed this crescendo with eloquence. We've connected the cover-ups from emails to erased sanctions, coerced allies to concealed fortunes. This isn't coincidence. It's conspiracy, and the people see through it now. The gavel fell, but the momentum surged. Crockett slumped her defenses in tatters under Kennedy's brilliant onslaught, the nation witnessing a masterclass in accountability. The revelations cascaded further, Kennedy unveiling suppressed DOE reports, invoices mismatched to phantom shipments, 58 million in discrepancies signed off by Crockett and Newsom's joint committee. He grilled Ramirez, who orchestrated the deletions. David didn't hesitate. Crockett's office, keep it quiet. Elections are coming. Kennedy's voice rose slightly, emphasizing the betrayal. This fraud by omission robbed voters of informed choices, turning democracy into a charade. Crockett muttered objections, but Kennedy overrode, objections don't erase facts. Congresswoman. The crowd's murmurs turned to chants of support, the air electric with vindication. He projected the full lobbying matrix, 42 million cycled through PACs, half-funneled offshore via Crockett's former partners. It's laundering, not leadership, he declared, his words a rallying cry. Ramirez added the killer blow. I wasn't an aide, I was a shield for their schemes. Kennedy nodded, his connection of evidence airtight. From 2012 suspensions to 2023 wires, the pattern is clear: evasion at every turn. Crockett's empire teetered, her shouts drowned in applause, Kennedy's intellect and integrity turning the tide irreversibly. The chapter built to its peak. Kennedy's final query hanging, will you admit the web you've spun, or let the truth bury it for you? Silence answered the nation, judging Kennedy's pursuit of justice, a shining example in the annals of oversight. Jasmine Crockett collapses under pressure from John Kennedy. 312M Bribe from Beijing exposed. The Grand Chamber in Washington, D.C. reverberated with the weight of history as the Oversight Committee hearing barreled toward its thunderous close, the nation's pulse racing in sync with the unfolding drama. John Kennedy, the indomitable senator from Louisiana, stood at the helm. His unwavering commitment to justice transforming the proceedings into a beacon of hope for a disillusioned public. The prior revelations had stripped away layers of deception. Beijing bribes, offshore millions, coerced cover-ups. But now came the reckoning, the moment where facts forged into formal charges, and the American people claimed their verdict. The air hung heavy, murmurs fading into expectant silence as Kennedy rose one final time, his hand pressing firmly on a folder marked with the seal of the Department of Justice. His presence, a pillar of integrity, amid the storm. Ladies and gentlemen, these are no whispers or wild speculations. These are draft indictments, straight from the DOJ, outlining charges that cut to the core of this betrayal wire fraud campaign, finance violations, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and failures to register as foreign agents. He let the words linger, flipping the page with deliberate gravity, revealing the staggering tally. Estimated misappropriated funds: $476 million, nearly $500 million drained through shell companies, bogus contractors, and laundered PACs. This chamber, this republic, cannot turn a blind eye. The crowd drew a collective breath, a mix of shock and righteous anger rippling through the room, reporters' devices exploding with alerts as the news broke live across networks. Kennedy's voice, steady and resonant with his trademark Southern resolve, carried the weight of a statesman who had dedicated his career to safeguarding the public trust. Congresswoman Crockett, Governor Newsom. The evidence is ironclad. Inflated renewable contracts laundered proceeds vanishing offshore. That 2018 Beijing lecture, not as education, but as a backdoor transaction with funds hitting Sebright Holdings accounts within days of your return. He locked eyes with Crockett, her face ashen, the once defiant spark dimmed to embers. This wasn't policy innovation. This was piracy on the high seas of public funds. The chamber stirred like a waking giant, but Kennedy called forth a voice that would humanize the horror his strategy. Ever thoughtful, amplifying the personal toll. Step forward, James Holloway, a retired veteran in a wheelchair, his medals glinting under the lights, his testimony a raw cry from the heartland. James rolled to the stand, his voice cracking with emotion, yet fueled by unyielding spirit, as he swore in. I scraped together $50,000 for Wind Coast 2030, believing it'd create jobs in California power homes for folks like me who served this country. But my donation didn't build a single turbine. It lined pockets, funded a Caribbean mansion traced to Crockett's kin. He pointed a trembling finger toward her, his eyes fierce. You didn't just pocket cash. You pilfered hope from veterans, families, entire communities left paying the price. Every syllable pierced deeper than any document, the gallery erupting in hushed sobs and nods, the betrayal no longer abstract but visceral, a wound on the soul of the nation. Kennedy nodded solemnly, his empathy evident, channeling the moment into a broader call for accountability. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Your courage reminds us all why we fight these battles. He turned to the cameras, addressing the millions watching his words, a clarion call rooted in timeless values. No title, no connection, no slogan of progress places anyone above the law. Jasmine Crockett and Gavin Newsom erected an empire on greed, but tonight that empire crumbles under the light of truth. Reporters swarmed the exits, headlines flashing, Crockett Newsom exposed in 312M. Fraud, Kennedy demands justice. Veterans embraced in the aisles, tears blending with vindication. Holloway raising a fist from his chair, whispering, "We did it for the people." Meanwhile, Crockett slumped in defeat. Eyes vacant, her aides averting gazes, Newsom's absence a shadow of disgrace. Their legacies once of power now etched in infamy. Kennedy stood before the throng, his closing remarks a masterpiece of inspiration, his voice firm yet uplifting. This isn't merely about two figures faltering. It's a wake-up for the system that enabled them. That system stands warned, the people crave better, and tonight, the people prevail. He snapped his folder shut, the sound a definitive punctuation. The gavel's final strike, not ceremony, but closure. The room emptied, but the ripples spread through courts ballots, the fabric of democracy itself. For Crockett and Newsom, no revival awaited, only justice's inexorable path. Kennedy exchanged nods with colleagues, his task ongoing, but his triumph here, undeniable, the empire toppled, the record sealed, the nation awakened. As the dust settled on this pivotal hearing, the lessons emerged crystal clear, etched in the minds of all who witnessed. First, transparency and integrity form the bedrock of true leadership. Without them, even the noblest causes twist into tools of self-interest. Crockett's and Newsom's downfall illustrates how corruption erodes not just personal reputations, but the very faith communities place in their representatives, leaving scars that demand vigilant healing. Yet in Kennedy's steadfast pursuit, We see the antidote leaders who prioritize truth over expediency, who wield facts as shields for the vulnerable. This saga urges every citizen to reflect on their role monitor. Officials demand answers, champion honesty in daily life. For in ceding oversight, we invite shadows. In embracing it, we forge a brighter republic. Kennedy's example teaches that one voice armed with resolve can illuminate darkness, restoring trust, and reminding us public service is a sacred duty, not a license for gain. Let this be the takeaway. Integrity endures, greed falls, and together we safeguard the promise of America. The story doesn't end here. It inspires action, educating generations on the fragility of trust and the power of accountability to rebuild it stronger.